Hello and welcome back everyone to The Incompetent Critic presented by I'm No Genius, a series in which I review some of the most beloved and some of the most despised films and television shows of all time, and I try to express my thoughts on them in a somewhat eloquent manner. For this episode, we're going to be looking at the beloved, the Oscar award-winning Lord of the Rings trilogy. The Lord of the Rings trilogy is based off of the adored novel series of the same name by the late great J.R.R. Tolkien. The first book, The Hobbit, came out in 1937, and the following three novels, which the movies are based off of, came out in the 50s. I was honestly pretty shocked when I saw how big the time gap was between The Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings trilogy novels. The Hobbit, a short story featuring Bilbo Baggins as the main character, was the first big hit of Tolkien's career, and it allowed him to write several more beloved stories for us to consume. Now, this may be my modern, capitalist 21st century brain talking, but why would he wait until 1954, almost 20 years later, to write the follow-up novels? I guess that nowadays it's commonplace that whenever there's a successful movie or novel or TV show, there will almost always be a sequel or a follow-up quickly on the way. This is why there are a dozen movies in the Fast and Furious franchise. Money talks, people.
I don't have friends. I got family.
Shut up! But I suppose this was not the case back in Tolkien's day because he sure took his sweet old time coming up with the last three books. And hindsight is always 20/20, this actually worked out in his favor. I mean, it's really hard to critique the guy when his novels are basically perfect. And back then, there weren't a bunch of movie studios clawing after every single decent novel that came out in hopes of their next blockbuster. In comparison to this, let's take a look at A Song of Ice and Fire, the extremely popular novel series by George R.R. Martin, which eventually was adapted into the immensely popular television series Game of Thrones. Martin's novels, released from 1998 to 2011, were pursued by many studios throughout Hollywood, but eventually landed into the hands of HBO, and Game of Thrones officially began on April of 2011. Now, this is typically par for the course. An author writes an extremely popular series, and that series quickly gets developed into a film or television show, striking while the iron is hot. However, the main problem in this case is that Martin never finished his novel series, and the TV show had no source material to base off in the later seasons, and they had to make up an ending on their own. And if you're a follower of the show, or any human being who hasn't been living under a rock in the past decade, then you know how bad that turned out. Now let's compare this to Tolkien. The Hobbit came out in 1937, and the rest of the books came out between 1954 and 1955. So after about 20 years, Tolkien fans finally got a complete novel series to call their own, and with the rising popularity of motion pictures, many people were hopeful for a film adaptation of his novels. However, they would have to wait an additional 22 years for that to happen. The first adaptation of Tolkien's work came out in 1977 with the animated film The Hobbit, an adaptation of the first book in the series. The film covers the main plot points of the novel and does it all in under 90 minutes. It's a cute movie, and it is a much better adaptation of the novel than the Hobbit trilogy that came out in the early 2010s.
Aren't you going to search me? I could have anything down my trousers.
Or nothing.
And before you ask, no, I'm not going to cover the Hobbit film trilogy in this episode. I have a lot to say about those movies, and I simply cannot squeeze all of my thoughts about them into one coherent essay along with the Lord of the Rings movies. That being said, I can almost promise you that there will be an episode on the trilogy in the future. However, it wasn't until 1978 that audiences got their first film adaptation of the Lord of the Rings, simply titled The Lord of the Rings. Simply put, this film is quite strange. For starters, it looks really, really weird. It's an animated film, but the animation is just quite odd. There are animated characters mixed along with live-action characters, and it just looks unsettling at times. There's a lot of rotoscoping used and strange animation techniques, and it doesn't blend together very well. For example, Sam, the beloved hobbit companion of Frodo, looks like a goblin. He kind of reminds me of Danny DeVito's Penguin in Batman Returns. Like, this character is supposed to look somewhat like a human being. Why would you make him look so gross? And it doesn't stop there either. Frodo, Boromir, Gollum, and Aragorn all look differently and act differently than they do in the novels. It's just strange overall, and I don't recommend you see it. On top of that, the movie only covers the first two books in the series, The Fellowship of the Ring and The Two Towers. That's right. There is no real conclusion in this movie. It covers the first two books, and then it just ends. I don't know why they would do this. It makes very little sense to me. The Return of the King novel is one of the greatest conclusions to any novel series or any fantasy series in the history of mankind. Why would you not include that in the very first film adaptation? But I'm getting sidetracked. What I'm trying to say is that the 1978 film is not the greatest film ever made, and it doesn't really represent how awesome these novels are. So right out of the gate, we are not off to a great start in the world of film for Lord of the Rings. But that was until a legend by the name of Peter Jackson stepped onto the scene. Peter Jackson came around in the mid-90s and said, "Hey, I really like The Lord of the Rings, and I want to give the books a proper adaptation." He pitched his idea to several film studios around Hollywood, and let's just say that he struggled to find a distributor that shared his vision. For example, he took the movie to the infamous Hollywood producer Harvey Weinstein, and Weinstein agreed to make the movie, but only if Jackson made it a 2-hour film. Yes, Weinstein wanted to make all 3 novels, which in total are over 500,000 words long, into a 2-hour movie. Can you imagine how terrible that would have been? It would have been a nightmare, and we would have had another mediocre Lord of the Rings film on our hands. However, Peter Jackson declined this offer, and he took the idea to New Line Cinema. Not only did New Line Cinema agree to let Peter Jackson make his adaptation, they greenlit all 3 films right there on the spot. I don't know if you're familiar with the business of movie making, but companies almost never approve all 3 movies at once. Typically, what they do is they greenlight the first movie, and if it does well, they'll greenlight a sequel or sometimes even 2. It's extremely rare for studios to approve of all 3 movies at once because it's hard to tell whether or not they're going to make money on all of them. For example, the Star Wars prequels were all greenlit at the same time because Lucasfilm basically knew they were going to make a ton of money on all of them. And guess what? Despite the poor critical reception, they all grossed hundreds of millions of dollars. This is mainly due to the fact that they were prequels to the extremely popular original Star Wars trilogy. However, with Lord of the Rings, there was no indication that the movies were going to make a profit other than the fact that Tolkien's novels were popular back in the 1950s. I'm not sure what Peter Jackson said to the executives at New Line Cinema when he made his pitch, but he must be the greatest salesman of all time to get them to approve all 3 movies at once. Immediately after the movies were approved, Peter Jackson and his team got to work and pre-production began on all 3 movies. Sets were built, costumes were designed, characters were casted, and in 2001, the first film of the new Lord of the Rings trilogy came out. Almost 50 years after the novel, the definitive film adaptation finally came out for audiences to enjoy. And with that, let's get to the first film in the trilogy, The Fellowship of the Ring. But before I start, I want to make a very, very, very important disclaimer. I will be reviewing the extended editions of every movie in this trilogy. I believe they are basically perfect, and you can't tell me otherwise. Okay, let's go. Now, before I get into this film, I have a bit of a confession to make. I never saw this movie growing up. I was born in 2002, a year after this movie was released, and as I was growing up, I had no desire to see this movie or any of the sequels. I was more drawn to film franchises like Harry Potter or Star Wars, and Lord of the Rings kind of fell under the radar for me. That was until I saw Game of Thrones. In 2021, I binge-watched the entire series of Game of Thrones, and I absolutely loved it. Well, except for the last season, but we're not going to talk about that. In fact, I loved it so much that I decided to do extensive research on the book series that it's based on, and the author of the series, George R.R. Martin. In my research, I learned that Martin was heavily inspired by J.R.R. Tolkien and The Lord of the Rings when he was crafting A Song of Ice and Fire. In fact, a reporter once described Martin as the Tolkien of our time.
I read Lord of the Rings, probably junior high school. You know, it opens like with a dissertation on pipeweed. And then there's a birthday party. And I'm saying, where are the giant snakes? Where are the scantily clad women? There's no sword fights here. What's going on? But then it started picking up steam. Rivendell and the Black Riders. By the time I got to the Mines of Moria, I had decided that this was the greatest book that I'd ever read.
So basically, by transitive property of equation, without Tolkien and The Lord of the Rings, there would be no Game of Thrones. And since Game of Thrones is one of my favorite TV shows of all time, I told myself that I had to sit down and watch the story that inspired it. So in 2022, as a 20-year-old wannabe film critic, I decided to sit down and watch The Fellowship of the Ring. And let me just say, I should have hopped on the Tolkien train much, much earlier. The Fellowship of the Ring premiered in 2001, a full 47 years after Tolkien's novel was published. The film, as well as the series as a whole, is absolutely stacked with talented actors. Viggo Mortensen, Elijah Wood, Ian McKellen, Sean Astin, Orlando Bloom, Sean Bean, Christopher Lee, Hugo Weaving, Kate Blanchett, Liv Tyler, Dom Monahan, Billy Boyd, Carl Urban, Andy Serkis, and several others make appearances. And for the record, I just want to note that I did not research any of those actors. I recited them from my memory. I'm not trying to brag or anything, I just want to express how good and memorable this cast is. The film grossed almost $900 million at the box office and currently sits at a 91% on Rotten Tomatoes. Translation: both critics and audiences alike think this movie is amazing. Further backing up this point is the fact that the film earned 12 Oscar nominations, including Best Picture, Best Director, and Best Supporting Actor. Everybody loves this movie, and it's a great start to the series. Now let's get to the plot. The film begins with an opening monologue from Galadriel that tells the audience everything we need to know about the world and the characters within it. The montage is very efficient, and it doesn't waste any time with any useless information. This is Middle-earth. It has humans, hobbits, elves, dwarves, orcs, etc. There are a bunch of powerful rings. This guy named Sauron created an evil powerful ring to rule over all the others. Sauron was seemingly killed in a war a long time ago, but the ring was never destroyed, and now it is lost. And now everyone is worried that as long as the ring is still intact, then Sauron may return. The opening montage very efficiently and simply lays out the obstacle for our heroes to overcome. Evil ring must be destroyed. Simple, effective, and Kate Blanchett has a really good voice for narration. But, side note, Galadriel, an elf, says that elves are the wisest and fairest of all beings. Really patting yourself on the back there, Galadriel. Anyways, after the opening montage, we meet the gang of hobbits that our story is going to follow. Frodo, Sam, Merry, Pippin, and Uncle Bilbo are the main hobbits that this story is going to focus on. If you remember, Bilbo was the main character in the Hobbit story and now is the uncle of Frodo Baggins. On Bilbo's birthday, an old wizard pal named Gandalf the Grey shows up to say hi. Gandalf is definitely the most iconic character of this story, and is mainly a testament to the stellar writing of Tolkien and Ian McKellen's masterful performance. McKellen played the character so well that he received an Oscar nomination for Best Supporting Actor at the 2002 Oscars. That being said, he did end up losing the award to Jim Broadbent. I love Jim Broadbent and all, but come on, it's Gandalf! After his birthday, Bilbo decides to leave all of his possessions to Frodo and move to Rivendell, the kingdom of the elves. And one of the possessions that he left Frodo is, gasp, the One Ring! Gandalf realizes that Sauron's forces will be on the way to recover the ring, so he, Frodo, Sam, Merry, and Pippin all leave the Shire. Gandalf then meets up with his wizard friend Saruman to ask for help, but Saruman has sided with Sauron. Wait a second. Saruman sided with Sauron? Try saying that 5 times fast. After hearing this, the two wizards fight, and Gandalf is overwhelmed, and he barely escapes with his life. Shortly after this, the hobbits go to a tavern, and they meet a ranger who agrees to take them to Rivendell. Oh, that's so nice. I wonder why he's doing this. While they're on their way to the city, the gang is attacked by ring wraiths, who are essentially the Lord of the Rings equivalent of Dementors from Harry Potter. Well, I suppose since Lord of the Rings came first, you would say that Dementors are the Harry Potter version of ring wraiths, but I digress. The bottom line is that the ring wraiths are soldiers of Sauron, and their job is to hunt down the One Ring. During the battle, Frodo gets stabbed by an enchanted blade and he is dying slowly. But before he succumbs to his wound, the elf princess Arwen rescues him and takes him to Rivendell, where he is cured. It's also revealed to us that the ranger and Arwen have a long history with each other, and they are in love. I wonder what will happen next. I have to say that Arwen's introduction scene is pretty cool. The chase, the stakes, the music, they're all on point. Speaking of which, the music in these movies is absolutely amazing. Howard Shore, the composer, masterfully displays the emotions of every scene in his music. The rest of the gang meet up with Frodo at Rivendell, and we get introduced to the Council of Elrond, which is composed of elves, dwarves, and humans. The Elf Lord Elrond calls the council to decide what they need to do with the One Ring. The council decides that they need to destroy the One Ring by casting it into the fires of Mount Doom in Mordor, which is quite a long journey. I guess you could say it would take like 12 hours to tell that story. See what I did there? The council sends the hobbits, Gandalf, Gimli the dwarf, Legolas the elf, Boromir the human, and the ranger to escort the One Ring to Mount Doom. This group is now and forever known as the Fellowship of the Ring. Dude, that's the name of the movie. But right before this, it is revealed to us that the Ranger is none other than Aragorn, son of Arathorn and rightful king of Gondor. Now, this reveal is pretty cool and it's played off perfectly by everyone involved, but I just have to say, naming your son Aragorn when your name is Arathorn is pretty stupid. Like, if your name is Brandon, you wouldn't name your son Branbin. It's just changing a letter and being lazy. Anyways, the Fellowship leaves Rivendell and the main plot of the series gets started. I know it's a huge joke at this point to say that the only thing that happens in The Lord of the Rings is that a bunch of people walk to a mountain, but no, that's not true. Well, it's kind of true, but you just stole that joke from Clerks too.
One ring to rule them all.
One ring to find them. Oh, Jesus.
One ring to bring them all.
And in the darkness bind them. Yes, Sid! Those fucking Hobbit movies were boring as hell. All it was a bunch of people walking. 3 movies of people walking to a fucking volcano.
I gotta say, the one thing that surprised me about this movie is how much I love seeing the members of the Fellowship interact. There's a bunch of cute moments with the members just goofing off during their long journey, and it brings a sense of relatableness to the story. I know I just called the fantasy series with elves and wizards and dwarfs relatable, but let me explain what I mean. Imagine if for the entire journey, all of our characters were so serious and they only ever talked about destroying the One Ring. It would have been really miserable and, most of all, really boring. It's kind of like when soldiers go off to fight in wars. Yes, the main goal is to win the war, but if you don't have fun during your downtime, then you're just going to lose your mind. I love the one moment when Boromir is teaching the elves how to fight and Merry and Pippin just dogpile him. Dogpile? That can't be right. Excuse me. Hobbit pile. That's better.
Sorry!
There's a shot! Hold him! Hold him tight! May!
Gentlemen, that's enough!
These little scenes bring a lot of life to the film, and it makes me wish that we got to see more of the Fellowship in the overall story. But we'll talk about that later. The Fellowship decides to take a shortcut on their journey through the mines of Moria, a dwarf civilization. After going into the mines, they realize that all the dwarfs are dead, and the Fellowship is attacked by orc soldiers and a cave troll. This is one of the only real battle sequences in this film, and it is pretty awesome. The CGI may be a little outdated, but it still looks pretty good. It takes place in a cave, so there's a sense of claustrophobia that is very prevalent as our heroes try to escape the mines with their lives. The gang fights off the orcs and they try to escape, but they are confronted by a Balrog, which is essentially a giant, fiery spirit demon with a whip that lives in the mines. I'm not sure what was going on in Tolkien's life for him to think of this terrifying conceptual monster, but it certainly worked because I was pretty scared while watching. The Fellowship narrowly escapes the Balrog, but Gandalf has to sacrifice himself so the others can get away.
Go back to the shadow. You shall not pass! Fly, you fools!
This scene is so tragic in the moment, and Frodo's screams are just heartbreaking. Hats off to Elijah Wood for the reaction. The Fellowship regroups and then continues to travel towards Mount Doom. Frodo wanders off from the group for a moment and is confronted by Boromir. Boromir, who is corrupted by the ring in that moment, attempts to kill Frodo and take the ring for himself, but he is interrupted when the group is ambushed by Uruk-hai. The Uruk-hai are essentially the strongest species of orcs. Boromir breaks free from the ring's spell, and he tries to fight off the orcs, but he is tragically killed after being shot in the chest with 3 arrows. This scene really gets me in my feels, man. Sean Bean is a great actor, and he brings a ton of depth to Boromir. Boromir's betrayal could just be seen as another betrayal by a beloved character, but it really emphasizes how much power the One Ring truly has. Boromir was such a kind and good-hearted character, and even he could become corrupted by the influence of the One Ring.
I would have followed you, my brother. My captain. My king.
From now on in the story, there is a lingering feeling that any of our heroes could become evil because of the ring at any given moment. Our heroes manage to fight off the Uruk-hai, but Merry and Pippin are abducted in the process. Frodo, fearing that the One Ring is too dangerous, decides to travel to Mordor alone, but he allows Sam to come along. The film ends with Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli setting off to rescue Merry and Pippin. This film is a rare film, especially when it comes to the ending. Think about it. This is the first film in a new trilogy of movies, and the ending of this film is basically a passing of the baton to the next movie. There's not really a conclusion here, it just carries over into the next film. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, I just wasn't expecting it. But keep in mind, New Line Cinema greenlit all 3 Lord of the Rings movies at once. So Peter Jackson didn't need to tell a complete story by movie's end, because he knew that he had 2 more movies to complete the whole story. It's definitely different from what I anticipated, but in a good way. This movie is awesome. The acting is amazing, the costumes, the sets, the music, the directing, the plot, everything is on point. Going into this movie, I knew next to nothing about the world of Middle-earth, and after this movie, I felt that I could give a full presentation on its history. Wink, wink. That's really a testament to how well all of the information was conveyed to the audience. At no point during the movie did I not know what was going on. From the opening monologue to the final farewell of our heroes, this film gives us all of the information we need without treating us like idiots. Great film, great start to the trilogy, highly recommend it if you haven't seen it, 9.7 out of 10. Now let's get to the follow-up film in the trilogy, The Lord of the Rings: The Two Towers. With most sequels in Hollywood, there is almost always one of 2 possibilities that play out. 1. The sequel misinterprets everything good about the first film and the quality drops drastically. Examples of this could be Caddyshack 2, Grease 2, The Son of the Mask, and pretty much every single Fast and Furious movie after Furious 7. Seriously, why couldn't they have just ended the series when Paul Walker died? It's getting embarrassing.
I got family.
Shut up! Shut the f***! You're all right.
The second possibility is that the sequel takes everything good from the first film and improves on the flaws and creates a sequel that surpasses the quality of the original film. Examples of this would be films like Hunger Games: Catching Fire, Aliens, T2 Judgment Day, and pretty much every new Mission Impossible movie that comes out. I know Ghost Protocol is technically the best one, but come on, every one of these movies improves on the last one that came before. It's like the anti-Fast and Furious franchise. I'm sorry for crapping on the Fast and Furious franchise so much in this Lord of the Rings episode, but it's how I feel. Lord of the Rings: The Two Towers is a rare thing in this respect because the first film in the series was almost perfect. So, one would think that the only thing that this film could be is a disappointment, but that's not quite true either. This movie precisely maintains the overall stellar quality of the first film seamlessly. From movie to movie, the quality remains exactly the same, which is definitely something to brag about. Much like the first film, The Two Towers was beloved by both critics and audiences alike. The film currently sits at a 95% on Rotten Tomatoes, grossed almost $1 billion at the box office, and was nominated for Best Picture in 2003. In this film, the Fellowship are all split apart and we bounce around between all of their stories. In the movie, we follow the groups Frodo and Sam taking the One Ring to Mordor, Merry and Pippin in captivity, and Aragorn and Gimli and Legolas trying to rescue them. In this film, we also get introduced to a lot more characters than we did in the first film. The first film mainly concerned itself with explaining the mythology of the world that we're seeing, while this movie mainly focuses on explaining the political and relational motivations of all the characters. We get a lot more human characters in this story, and as we all know, humans are very emotional, and they always try to put themselves in better positions of power. I don't mind the human storylines as much as other people do, but I can definitely see why some would find it boring compared to the other events in the story. It's not really a fair comparison. Would you rather watch a hobbit carrying a ring of pure evil across thousands of miles in an attempt to destroy it and save the world? Or would you rather see the drama that unfolds because a father loved his dead son more than his currently alive one? It's really an easy choice. This film can drag on a bit, but all things considered, it's still an entertaining watch all the way through. And with that, let's get to the plot of this worthy successor. The opening to The Two Towers is probably the best opening in the series. Given the fact that Fellowship had a very strong opening with Galadriel's monologue, this scene really had to deliver in order for it to be considered on par with the first film. And not only does this opening scene meet the quality of the first scene in Fellowship, it surpasses it in every way. The film opens, we get a bunch of wide shots of the Misty Mountains, and then we hear the voices of the Fellowship members. Specifically, we are hearing the scene in which Gandalf sacrifices himself in the first movie. It's basically the same exact scene, shot for shot, all the way through, right up until Gandalf falls. Instead of cutting to the devastated reactions of the Fellowship members, the music booms and the camera follows Gandalf and the Balrog as they fall down this chasm. The music swells as they fall, and Gandalf retrieves his sword on the way down, and the fight continues. Simply put, this scene is awesome. Fellowship really sets this up as a tragic yet heroic sacrifice for Gandalf, and then this scene comes along and shows us that Gandalf ain't gonna die that easy. Everything about this scene is epic. The shots, the music, the action, the performance from Ian McKellen, I really can't give it enough praise. The scene ends with Frodo waking up from a dream. The movie somewhat alludes to the possibility that Gandalf surviving could have been a dream, but we all know it was real. Frodo and Sam continue on their journey into Mordor, and they eventually discover that they are being followed by this disgusting, slimy, grotesque, and yet somehow adorable creature named Gollum. A CGI creature played by the king of motion capture and one of the most underrated actors of all time, Andy Serkis.
Here we go, it's okay.
I don't want to do it. Yes, you do, precious. You do? No, I don't, because I can't bear to bring him out again. What do you mean, bring him out again? It's how you made your living for days.
Gollum is one of the most iconic characters of all time in the history of cinema, and he plays a major role in this trilogy. He represents the absolute worst-case scenario if Frodo fails to destroy the One Ring. Once upon a time, Gollum was just a normal-looking hobbit named Smeagol, but the ring corrupted him so much that he lived for hundreds of years, and he became a pale, grotesque creature that we see now. The writing of this character is great, and it's truly a testament to the talents of J.R.R. Tolkien. However, I do have to say that it's really the performance of Andy Serkis that makes this character so great. Serkis was originally brought on just to do the voice of Gollum, but Peter Jackson was so impressed with his body movements and the overall performance that he decided to go the route of performance capture. Serkis gives his all in this role, and it propelled him to even more high-profile motion capture roles like King Kong and Caesar in the Planet of the Apes trilogy. Side note, the Planet of the Apes trilogy is one of my favorite trilogies of all time. It's super underrated, and I promise I will eventually make an episode about them. I'm sorry, but I'm such a fanboy for Andy Serkis. Moving on, Gollum is then captured by Sam and Frodo, but Frodo takes pity on him, and he allows him to guide them to Mordor. Merry and Pippin are still prisoners of the Uruk-hai until a group of Rohirrim, soldiers of the human kingdom Rohan, attack the group, and they manage to escape. Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli meet the Rohan soldiers, and they are told that Rohan's king, Theoden, is currently under the control of Sauron. Aragorn and the gang search for Merry and Pippin, and they don't find them, and they are led to believe that they are dead. This is when we get the iconic moment that Lord of the Rings nerds will never shut up about. Aragorn kicks a helmet, and he lets out a giant scream. The short version of this is that Viggo Mortensen broke his toe as he kicked the helmet, and that scream was very much due to real pain. Method actors, am I right? After this, the trio travels into the Fanghorn Forest, and they discover that, gasp, Gandalf is alive! So apparently this is what happened with Gandalf and the Balrog. Gandalf and the Balrog fought for a couple of days, Gandalf was killed, and then he was resurrected as Gandalf the White. I'm not kidding about the couple of days part. Gandalf literally says that the two of them battled for 2 days and 2 nights. This is astonishing to me because I get exhausted from walking at a moderate pace on a treadmill for 15 minutes. I guess Ian McKellen is just that guy. Now, one could say that this part of the story could be seen as J.R.R. Tolkien bringing back a character to life just for some arbitrary reason, but that one person would be incorrect. Gandalf coming back to life serves a large purpose within the story, and it is a major part of his character arc. Gandalf the Grey wanted to save Middle-earth, but he lacked the power and the wisdom to do so. After he died and gave everything he had to Middle-earth, he achieved a higher power and he was brought back to life to save the world from Sauron, who is basically the manifestation of pure evil. In case it hasn't slapped you in the face right now, Gandalf is heavily inspired by the story of Jesus Christ. And the fact that Tolkien was a devout Catholic further emphasizes this point. After this, Gandalf leads Aragorn and the gang to Rohan, and they free Theoden from Sauron's influence. So basically, this guy named Grima Wormtongue was corrupting Theoden, and as soon as Gandalf showed up, he said, "Peace, I'm out." Theoden discovers that Sauron's forces are going to attack Rohan, so they decided to evacuate the entire kingdom and take refuge at the fortress of Helm's Deep. While they're on their way to Helm's Deep, they're attacked by a group of orcs, and Aragorn gets separated from the group. During this time, he kind of randomly goes on this weird elvish spirit journey before rejoining the group. And on his way back, he discovers that an army of orcs are marching towards Helm's Deep. During this time, Merry and Pippin travel through the Fanghorn Forest, and they encounter a group of Ents, who are essentially giant living talking trees.
Okay, let's paint in a few little happy trees there. Nothing wrong with making friends with trees. Holy knuckles, I am high as a kite right now.
The hobbits ask for their help in the fight against Sauron, but they initially refuse. Keep that in mind because we're going to come back to it later. All throughout the movie, we periodically flash back to Frodo, Sam, and Gollum as they keep on walking towards Mordor. I really like the storyline of Gollum trying to resist the temptation of the One Ring and rediscover the goodness in his heart, but at the end of the day, it's just too much for him to overcome.
Master's my friend. You don't have any friends. Nobody likes you. Not listening. Not listening. You're a liar. And a thief. No. Murderer.
On their journey, the trio is captured by soldiers of Gondor led by Faramir, the brother of Boromir. I'll quickly sum up the whole subplot with Faramir and his family. Faramir and Boromir are both sons of Denethor, the temporary ruler of Gondor. Denethor loved Boromir and he hates Faramir for basically no reason. And yeah, that's kind of it. It's like a soap opera when you think about it. Seeing that Frodo has the One Ring, Faramir decides to bring the trio back to Gondor to give the ring to his father as a gift. I'm sure that'll make him super proud of you. Aragorn and the gang make it to Helm's Deep and they prepare for the battle. Gandalf rides off in search of reinforcements and an army of elves show up sent by Elrond, making this the first time that men and elves have fought alongside each other in over 1,000 years. The two armies take their positions, an old guy accidentally shoots an arrow and kills an orc, and as Theoden says,
So it begins.
the Battle of Helm's Deep is widely regarded as the greatest fantasy battle in the history of cinema. And as I was watching it, I could definitely see why. The battle is around 40 minutes long and it's engaging all throughout. There are highs, there are lows, moments of levity, moments of despair, moments of courage, and a satisfying ending to cap it all off. The action is great, the effects look pretty good even by today's standards, and most importantly, the battle strategies of both armies actually make sense. There are countless examples of fantasy battles where there is either a dumb battle strategy or even worse, no battle strategy, and it's just a bunch of people dying randomly. This battle has a simple strategy on both sides. The orc strategy, breach the wall and kill everyone. The hero strategy, hold off the orcs until Gandalf can arrive with reinforcements. I cannot stress enough how much I love it when there are simple stakes to a really big battle. This is part of the reason why I love the final battle in the original Star Wars movie. It's simplicity. It works. Don't overcomplicate things with your movie.
I have you now, young Skywalker. And with today's gas prices, not a minute too soon. What the deuce?
Look at us. Look at how much more comfortable we are now shooting stuff.
I love the end of this battle where our heroes are at their wits' end and they have to make a final stand, and then Gandalf shows up with the Rohirrim to save the day. As far as battles go, this is a 10 out of 10. Flashing back to Merry and Pippin, Saruman has begun deforestation in Fanghorn Forest, and the Ents are super ticked. You know, because they're trees. So the Ents decide to fight back against Saruman's forces, and they trap him inside of his tower in Isengard. Flashing back to Frodo, while they're on their way to Gondor, Frodo is almost killed by a ring wraith and temporarily falls under the influence of the One Ring. After almost killing Sam, Frodo breaks free from the ring's influence, and Faramir releases them after learning of the plan to destroy the evil ring.
But in the end, it's only a passing thing. This shadow, even darkness must pass. A new day will come. And when the sun shines, it'll shine out the clearer. Those were the stories that stayed with you.
Frodo, Sam, and Gollum continue on their journey to Mordor, and the film ends with Gollum claiming that he will kill Frodo and take the ring for himself at the right moment. This film is a worthy successor to the first one. A common criticism in this movie is that it has too many boring moments and it drags at times, and it does, but there's actually a good reason for that. The pacing of the second movie is a little odd compared to the first one. The first half of the Two Towers novel focuses on Aragorn's group and Merry and Pippin, and the second half shows everything that Frodo and Sam were doing at that same time. If the film was a one-to-one adaptation of the novel, it wouldn't have been paced very well. Peter Jackson and his team had to do a lot of work and take a lot of liberties to ensure that the pacing of this film was engaging all throughout. The whole sequence where Aragorn gets separated from the group and he goes on a spirit journey, not in the book. Faramir's interactions with Frodo and Sam, not in the book. Legolas surfing down the stairs during the Battle of Helm's Deep, not in the book.
What the
These scenes were added to flesh out the world of Middle-earth a little bit more and add personality to the characters, but many of them could have been left on the cutting room floor. Except the Legolas surfing one. That one is awesome, and it will stay. All in all, this movie is great. The few flaws that it has are very small, it has one of the greatest battle scenes in the history of cinema, the performances are still great, and it perfectly sets up the final film in the trilogy. Watch this film if you haven't seen it already, 9.4 out of 10. On that note, let's get to the final installment of this trilogy, The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King. The Lord of the Rings, Return of the King, the finale to one of the greatest film trilogies ever made, is not that good.
Hold up. Wait a minute. Something ain't right.
I'm just kidding. It's amazing. Everything great about the first two films is present, and it improves on all the flaws that we've seen thus far in the series. The film came out in 2003, over 20 years ago, and it is still beloved to this day. The film currently sits at a 94% on Rotten Tomatoes, and it grossed over $1.1 billion at the box office, making this the only film in the trilogy to surpass the billion-dollar mark. I don't know if you guys understand how amazing of a feat that is, given the fact that every single movie makes $1 billion nowadays, but 3 movies in this trilogy, and every single one of them were hits at the box office and were beloved by critics. Think of some of the greatest trilogies ever made: Star Wars, The Godfather, The Matrix, Back to the Future, Toy Story, Indiana Jones. Most of these trilogies consist of films that were very different from one another in terms of quality. This makes it a very rare thing for all 3 movies to be considered great by both fans and critics. With Star Wars, the first 2 films are loved by all, and the third one is widely considered weaker in comparison. With The Godfather, the first 2 films are basically perfect, and the third one is kind of a dud.
I did not care for The Godfather.
What?
Did not care for The Godfather.
How can you even say that, Dad?
Didn't like it.
Peter, it's so good. It's like the perfect movie.
This is what everyone always says. Whenever they say,
Robert De Niro, Al Pacino. I mean, you never see Robert Duvall.
No, fine actor. Did not like the movie. Why not? Couldn't get into it.
Explain yourself. What didn't you like about it?
It insists upon itself, Lois.
With The Matrix, the first movie is an all-time classic, but the second and third films are pretty forgettable. With Back to the Future, all 3 films are beloved, but the first one is clearly the best out of the trilogy. All of the Toy Story movies are great, but only the third film made a major splash at the box office. Everybody loves the Indiana Jones movies, but the films aren't really connected with one another. I could go on for a while, but you get my point. It's really tough to make a film trilogy that both fans and critics adore. The Lord of the Rings trilogy is probably the only trilogy where every film maintains such a high level of quality that it becomes difficult to choose which one is the best. However, if I may boldly state my opinion in my own video essay that I worked very hard to create, I believe that this film, The Return of the King, is the best in the trilogy.
That's such a basic fucking bitch answer.
I'm sorry to disappoint all of the Fellowship lovers out there, but this is one of the greatest films that I have ever watched. And I've watched a lot of films. And I am not the only person who has this opinion. At the 2004 Academy Awards, this film was nominated for a whopping 11 Oscars. An impressive feat, no doubt, but what is truly remarkable is that it went 11 for 11.
And the Oscar goes to... It's a clean sweep. The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King, Barry M. Osborne, Peter Jackson, and Tran Walsh producers.
This is the 11th Academy Award win tonight for The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King, tying the record for most wins with the films Titanic and Ben-Hur.
That's right, 11 nominations and 11 wins, tying the record for the most wins ever at the Oscars. At the Oscars, The Return of the King won Best Visual Effects, Best Sound Mixing, Best Original Song, Best Original Score, Best Makeup, Best Film Editing, Best Costume Design, Best Art Direction, Best Adapted Screenplay, Best Director, and the most coveted award of all, Best Picture. This nerdy film, based on a book written 70 years ago, won Best Picture at the Academy Awards and grossed $1 billion at the box office. What a world we live in. And here's the thing about the awards that this movie got. Even though it got 11 Oscar nominations, it should have gotten even more. The acting in this film is outstanding, as it was in the previous two films. Every actor is giving 100% effort into their performances, and they capture the emotions of the scenes extremely well. And it is just heartbreaking to me to see that this film received 0, I repeat, 0 acting nominations at the Oscars. You're telling me that we can't give a Best Actor nomination to Viggo Mortensen or Elijah Wood? We can't give a Best Supporting Actor nod to Ian McKellen or Sean Astin? We can't give a nomination to Cate Blanchett? And worst of all, we can't give a single nomination to Andy freaking Serkis? This is why no one watches the Oscars anymore. Anyways, this film is a classic, one of the greatest films ever made, so let's not waste any more time and get right to the plot. The film begins with showing us the very disturbing backstory of Gollum, at this point named Smeagol. This opening scene is highly unsettling, and it's really in place to show us how terrible things could end up if Frodo doesn't get rid of the One Ring. Gollum was once a normal hobbit, and he became so obsessed with the ring that he killed his best friend and became a sickening creature over hundreds of years. Andy Serkis gives an amazing performance as always. After the opening, we flash forward to the present day, where Aragorn and the gang are celebrating winning the Battle of Helm's Deep. Shortly after this, Gandalf escorts the group to Isengard, where they reunite with Merry and Pippin and confront Sauron, who is still trapped in his tower. Keep in mind, I am going off of the extended editions of these movies because in the theatrical versions, Sauron is not included in this movie and we never get closure on his character. However, in the extended edition, we do. Gandalf and the gang confront Sauron and Grima Wormtongue, who are trapped in the tower. Long story short, they argue for a moment, Wormtongue stabs Sauron, Legolas kills Wormtongue, and then Sauron falls over the tower to his death.
You ought to see me with the 357 Magnum. I'm awesome.
As far as death scenes for villains go, this could have been better, but any death scene is better than just saying, "Oh, he's trapped up in his tower. No, don't worry about him, he won't do anything." It's just weird. After his death, the group goes through Sauron's tower, and Pippin sees a vision of Sauron's forces attacking Gondor. After hearing this, Gandalf and Pippin ride to Gondor to prepare for the incoming battle. Gandalf and Pippin show up to Minas Tirith, and Denethor is being such a jerk. He talks crap about Aragorn, he doesn't listen to Gandalf, and worst of all, he treats Faramir like such a piece of garbage. Faramir does not deserve that.
Billy.
You.
Billy, we've already told me off. Let's move on.
You're tacky and I hate you.
Denethor is so annoying to me because he's just so open with the fact that Boromir was by far his favorite son. Don't get me wrong, I know all about being the favorite child in a family, but at least my parents have the decency to hide it from my siblings. Shortly after this, Faramir and his group of soldiers get attacked by orcs, and Gondor signals for the aid of Rohan. Theoden hesitates for a moment, given the fact that they just fought a battle like yesterday, but then he agrees to fight alongside Gondor. While this is happening, Gollum has slowly turned Frodo and Sam against one another, and Frodo orders Sam to go home. This is a sad scene, but it's also kind of funny to think that this entire argument was caused by Sam having breadcrumbs all over his shirt. That being said, it is kind of weird to see Sean Astin be so confrontational as Sam because he's just such a nice guy in every other role he plays. But in these movies, if someone's talking crap about Frodo, his hands are already up.
You fat puff.
Wow, no.
He's just that loyal friend that everybody wants in their life. However, Sam turns back to go home, and Frodo and Gollum continue on their way. Before the Battle of Minas Tirith, Elrond shows up and gives Aragorn the reforged sacred sword of his ancestor, former king Isildur. With the sword, he can summon an army of dead soldiers to help them in the battle against the orcs. This plot point is pretty cool, and I think it's the only time in the history of fiction that an army of undead soldiers are fighting for the good guys. And so, Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli journey into the mountains to summon the army. And this is where a lot of people have a problem with the extended edition of this movie. You see, in the theatrical cut, our heroes go into the mountains, they meet the army, Aragorn asks for help, and then we cut away before we get an answer. Then we don't see Aragorn, Gimli, or Legolas for over a half an hour until they show up at the battle and it's revealed that Aragorn did convince the ghosts to help. The fact that we don't see them for that long and they all show up to save the day effectively builds tension, and it has a great payoff. However, in the extended cut, everything is the same up until the point where Aragorn asks for help. The scene goes on, the ghosts refuse to help, a bunch of human skulls start falling onto our heroes, the trio escapes the mountains, Aragorn is sad that they failed, and then the ghosts just come out and say, "Oh, dude, never mind. We'll fight with you. We'll help. Don't worry." And as the viewer, you're just like confused because what was the point of that entire sequence if the ghosts were just going to agree to help in the end? It wasn't like Aragorn did anything to change their minds. They literally did nothing and the ghosts agreed to join them. I guess they just needed that extra 45 seconds to think about Aragorn's offer before giving an answer.
Fight for us and regain your honor. What say you?
2 seconds later.
We fight.
But it doesn't stop there. Shortly after this, we get a scene of our heroes stealing a boat so they can get back to the battle quicker. I don't know why they included this scene into the extended edition. I mean, I honestly think we could have just assumed that they got back to the battle on a boat since, they arrived to the battle on a boat. We didn't need to see this scene at all. This is much worse for the story because now we know that Aragorn and the ghosts are already on their way to help. It doesn't leave anything to the imagination and it's worse off for it. A slight misstep by Peter Jackson, but let's keep this thing rolling. Frodo and Gollum continue on without Sam, and Gollum leads Frodo into a nest of a giant spider. Frodo is promptly stabbed by the spider, and Gollum tries to steal the ring, but Sam shows up and he saves him. Sam gets so many hero moments in this movie, and I love every single one of them. Gollum then runs away, but Frodo gets captured by a gang of orcs. The orcs take Frodo to Sauron's tower, and Sam follows them. Sauron's forces begin to attack Minas Tirith, and our heroes are hopelessly outnumbered. Believing that Faramir is dead, Denethor commits suicide by burning himself alive and jumping off a balcony. Look, I just want to say that suicide is bad, and death is not funny, but I found this sequence hilarious. The entire time, Pippin is literally screaming at Denethor that Faramir is still alive, but Denethor is like a 5-year-old in an argument that's just plugging his ears and saying, "La la 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 la, I can't hear you."
He's passed away! He's dead! No! Dead! Dead!
Things look pretty bad for Gondor, but then the army of Rohan arrives to help. Now, the battle is more balanced, but our heroes take a lot of losses. Theoden dies, Rohan keeps losing a bunch of soldiers, and the orcs bring in a bunch of war elephants to just stomp over everyone. It looks like our heroes are going to lose, but then Aragorn shows up with the ghost army and turns the tide of the battle. The reaction of theatrical edition viewers: "Oh yeah, let's go, such a satisfying moment!" The reaction of extended edition viewers: "Oh, yeah, that's right, they were on their way. Okay, yeah, let's go." A lot of really cool moments take place during this last part of the battle. Aragorn charging with the ghost army, iconic. Legolas single-handedly taking down a war elephant, iconic. Eowyn and Merry killing the Witch King, super iconic.
No man can kill me.
I am no man.
And despite all the deaths and hardships, our heroes win the day and Aragorn sets the Ghost Army free. While this battle is not as good as the Battle of Helm's Deep in my opinion, it is certainly a close runner-up for me when it comes to fantasy battles. It checks all the boxes. High stakes, understandable battle strategies, satisfying moments, it has everything. For what is essentially the biggest battle in the trilogy, it gets the job done pretty well. This battle is an easy 9.5 out of 10. Shortly after the battle, Sam rescues Frodo from the orcs and they make it to Mount Doom. But there's like thousands of orcs standing in their way. Recognizing this, Aragorn leads the armies of Gondor and Rohan to Mordor to distract the armies of orcs, which will allow Sam and Frodo to climb the mountain. The final battle at Mordor isn't as impressive as the Battle of Helm's Deep or Minas Tirith, but it doesn't really have to be. The battle is just a distraction. The real focus of the scene is Sam and Frodo slowly climbing the mountain to destroy the ring. Everything depends on Frodo destroying the ring, and I'm glad that the movie focuses on that instead of just another scene of soldiers smashing into each other. I will say, though, the amount of iconic lines that come from this small portion of the movie is literally insane.
A day may come when the courage of men fails, when we forsake our friends and break all bonds of fellowship. But it is not this day.
Do you remember the Shire, Mr. Frodo? It'll be spring soon. The orchards will be in blossom.
By all that you hold dear on this good earth, I bid you stand! Men of the West!
Come on, Mr. Frodo. I can't carry it for you, but I can carry you. Come on!
For Frodo.
As the battle rages on, Frodo and Sam make it to the top. But as soon as Frodo is about to destroy the ring has fully corrupted him, and Frodo claims the ring for himself. This moment absolutely broke me. It's really heartbreaking because Frodo is like the nicest person ever in this story, and the fact that he was carrying the burden for the entire journey only for him to be worn down at the end, it's just a tragedy. However, this tragedy is short-lived because Gollum pops up out of nowhere and tries to steal the ring from Frodo one last time. The two fight for a brief moment, but the fight ends with Gollum taking the ring and falling into the fires of Mount Doom, killing himself and destroying the ring for good. With this, the soul of Sauron dies forever, and his army of orcs are destroyed along with Mordor. This is an extremely satisfying moment, and it was well worth the 12 hours of sitting on the couch it took to get here. And I'm not even being sarcastic. I would watch it all again in a heartbeat. I'll do it right now. Hold on, I'll be right back.
12 sleepless hours later.
Yeah, I just did it again, and it was still really good. However, after the ring is destroyed and our heroes have finally won, we reach another common criticism of this film. The ending is pretty long. About a half hour long, to be specific. Ordinarily, I would have a major problem with this, but this movie is an exception for two reasons. Number one, the movie is already like 4 hours long, so the ending isn't really that long in ratio. And number two, the final 30 minutes make sure to leave no open ends, and every scene is crucial until the runtime is officially over. Here's what the ending consists of. Sam and Frodo are rescued by the Eagles.
Welcome to the Hotel California.
All of our heroes reunite at Minas Tirith. Aragorn is crowned the King of Gondor and marries Arwen. The hobbits return to the Shire. Sam gets married. Frodo leaves for the Undying Lands, and the film ends. There's a lot of people that think this film should have ended when the ring was destroyed. There is some merit to this argument. A lot of the scenes in the ending could have been left up to our imagination, but there is one reason why I disagree with this argument. Frodo. After the ring is destroyed, Frodo is overwhelmed with grief and the trauma of failing his task. Keep in mind, Frodo did not destroy the ring. Gollum destroyed the ring. This weighs on Frodo's mind heavily in all of the scenes of the ending. Frodo never seems truly happy. It always looks like something is weighing him down, and that something is the guilt of allowing himself to be corrupted by the ring. After the 4-year time jump at the end, we can still see that Frodo is still being affected by the journey he made, and he wants to be rid of these feelings forever. When Frodo finally steps onto the ship heading for the Undying Lands, he smiles at his friends. Even though he will never see any of them again, he is finally at peace and he will live out the rest of his days in paradise. The ending of this film is crucial to the development of Frodo's character. He went on a journey, carried the burden, failed his task, and he made peace with himself in the end. The ending of this movie is perfect, and it will always be perfect until the end of time. I would be a fool to give Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King, anything less than a 9.8 out of 10. A satisfying and heartwarming ending to an amazing trilogy. After all these years, the Lord of the Rings trilogy is still regarded as one of, if not the best film trilogy in the history of cinema. The performances, the sets, the cinematography, the directing, the costumes, the writing, everything stands out as exceptional, even by today's standards. And to be honest, even though The Hobbit and The Silmarillion are really good additional stories in the Lord of the Rings canon, I wouldn't have minded if the Lord of the Rings cinematic franchise ended with Return of the King. Like I said earlier, I will talk in depth about the Hobbit movies someday, but for now, I'm just going to say that they were unnecessary, and I will leave it at that. As for Rings of Power, I have not seen it, and from the reviews I have seen, I am not persuaded in the slightest to go watch it.
Give me the meat, and give it to me raw.
Why would you say that? Like, you put me in such an uncomfortable situation. Like,
I wish executives in Hollywood would stop milking every single good idea that makes the slightest amount of money. Just like how not every film needs a sequel, not every series needs a franchise. As Paul McCartney once said, let it be.
Man, I said, I'm not white. I may look white, but I'm black inside, boy.
The Lord of the Rings trilogy is widely described as one of the greatest film trilogies of all time, and I have thoroughly enjoyed re-exploring them today. Thank you for watching. If you are not subscribed to the show, please do so right now, and I'll see you next time.